I gossiped about his job. His retaliation taught me a harsh lesson. Hello, Reddit. A bit of a long-time lurker on here, but this is my first time actually posting. I never thought I'd be one of those people airing their dirty laundry online, but I feel like I've hit rock bottom, and I don't know where else to turn. My husband has absolutely gone against me, and I am in such a dilemma because I know, deep down, that it is entirely my fault. He's talking about divorce, but I'm not ready to give up on us yet. I don't want a divorce. I love him. I know I messed up. Big time. But I'm ready to do whatever it takes to make things right. I'm here because I'm desperate. I'm willing to listen to any advice, even if it's harsh, because I don't know how else to approach this. Just for context, so you can understand where I'm coming from. My name is Jennifer, and let's call my husband Wilfred. We've been married for about 3 years, so it's not a very long time, but I honestly thought we had an amazing relationship. We didn't have the perfect marriage, who does? But we always made it work. Or at least that's what I thought. Wilfred and I have known each other since high school, but I've always been a little disappointed in him. The disappointment started when we were teenagers. After high school, while I chose the traditional path and went off to college, Wilfred decided to go to trade school to study culinary arts. He said it was his passion, and he'd always dreamed of becoming a chef. At the time, I thought it was a phase, a whimsical idea he'd eventually grow out of. I assumed that as he got older, he'd come to his senses and realize that the real world demanded something different, something more prestigious, something like what I was pursuing. To his credit, Wilfred has been incredibly successful in his career. I can't deny that. He earns very well, and in fact, he owns his own restaurant now. It's thriving, and he pulls in 6 figures annually, which is more than I make, even with my degree, and I know I should be proud of him. But, and I hate admitting this even to myself, a part of me still feels embarrassed. When we were in high school, Wilfred was the valedictorian. He was the guy, brilliant, driven, and full of promise. Everyone thought he'd end up at some Ivy League school or become a doctor or lawyer or something equally impressive. Even I had those expectations for him, and I know he must have felt them too. So when he announced he was going to trade school instead of college, it felt like a slap in the face, not just to me, but to everyone who believed in him. I remember laughing every single time Wilfred would bring up his dream of becoming a chef. It wasn't meant to be cruel, though I realize now how it must have come across. Back then, it just seemed impossible to take seriously. He'd always been the smartest guy in the room, no exaggeration. He was the one people would turn to when they needed help understanding a tough concept in school or solving a problem. Teachers adored him, parents pointed to him as a role model, and friends relied on him for advice. So when he talked about becoming a chef, I thought it was a phase or a joke. How could someone so brilliant, so full of potential, settle for cooking? It felt beneath him. I know that sounds awful, but back then, all I could think about was the traditional definition of success: college, a prestigious job, climbing the corporate ladder. To me, that was the right path, the path someone like Wilfred was destined to follow. But Wilfred didn't see it that way. He was stubborn, and no matter how much I protested, he still went to trade school. I'd occasionally ask him if he was still serious about it, subtly trying to nudge him toward reconsidering. But every time he'd just smile and say he loved it too much to do anything else. And then, to my surprise, and I guess to his credit, he built exactly the career he said he would. Now, some years later, I can see just how wrong I was to doubt him. His name is well known in the community, and people rave about his food. Financially, he's more than stable. From the outside looking in, he's accomplished more than most people ever will. But, and I hate admitting this, I still couldn't completely shake the feeling of disappointment. It's not fair, I know that. Wilfred's success speaks for itself. But still yet, there was this nagging voice in my head that kept saying, but what if? What if he had gone to college? What if he had pursued something more serious or prestigious? What if he had lived up to the expectations everyone had for him? I mean, think about how much more he could have accomplished if he had followed the path I thought was right for him. Honestly, I felt embarrassed. Embarrassed that he didn't go to college. Embarrassed that he wasn't living the life I thought he was meant to live. It's not that I don't love him or respect what he has achieved. I do. But I mean, Fred is brilliant. He's the kind of guy who can hold his own in any conversation, no matter the topic. He's one of those rare people who just seem to know a little bit about everything. You talk to him for 5 minutes, and you realize how intelligent he is. So it's not like I'm blind to his abilities, it's just, when I tell people what my husband does for a living, I always feel this need to defend it, to explain it. Fred is a full-blown, trained, talented chef. He owns his own restaurant, and it's a good one. People love it. But the thing is, when I say he's a chef, I see the look people give me. You know the one. That subtle, "Oh, is that all?" kind of look. It's frustrating, and it gets to me more than I'd like to admit. For a while, I tried to spin it in a way that sounded better. I used to tell people he owned a restaurant, which wasn't technically a lie. He does own it, but I'd leave it at that, praying and hoping they wouldn't dig deeper. I wanted them to picture him as this savvy businessman, not the guy in the kitchen wearing an apron. Of course, that backfired. My coworkers insisted on coming to the restaurant one night. They were all excited to try the food, and naturally they loved it. They wanted to continue coming there, so it didn't take them long to figure out that Fred wasn't just the owner. He was the chef, too. The one sweating in the kitchen, making sure everything was perfect. And for some reason, that felt embarrassing to me. One of my coworkers, who's also a friend, pulled me aside once and asked why Fred was a chef. He said he didn't mean it in a bad way, that he was just curious. But I could feel the judgment in the question. Why would someone as smart as Fred choose to be a chef? Why not something more respectable, more lucrative? I didn't know what to say. I mumbled something about it being his dream and tried to change the subject, but that question stuck with me because it wasn't just him asking it. Even our high school friends, the ones I'm still close to, have always said the same thing in one way or another. They'll joke about how Fred could have been the next big tech entrepreneur, or how he wasted his potential by going into food. And I get it. I've thought the same thing myself. Fred is so smart, so capable. What if he had chosen a different path? What if he'd gone into tech or finance? What if he'd started his own company? He could have been a millionaire by now. Maybe even the next Mark Zuckerberg. Sure, he's doing well now. The restaurant is successful, and he's happy. But sometimes I can't help but think about what could have been. It was like there was this little voice in the back of my head that wouldn't shut up. I think that was when I started expressing just how much I hated his job. The more resentful I felt, the less I tried to hide it. I used to keep it to myself, or at least I thought I did. I mean, sure, I'd make the occasional sassy comment or roll my eyes when people brought it up, but I never outright admitted that I hated it. I thought I was being subtle, but looking back, I wasn't fooling anyone. Not him, not my friends, not even myself. But as the resentment grew, so did the way I expressed it. I stopped holding back. If he didn't want to acknowledge how much I hated his job, then fine, but I wasn't going to pretend anymore. My friends didn't help. They were relentless about it, and I see now how much of bullies they really were. Back then, I didn't realize it. I just thought they were being blunt or keeping it real. But the truth is, they fed into my insecurities and made everything worse. They would bring it up all the time, as if it were the most fascinating thing about my life. They'd ask if he had finally decided to stop playing around and take life seriously. They talked about how if he went back to school now, he could still make something of himself, and how he was too smart to waste away in a kitchen. They made it sound like being a chef wasn't a real career, like it was just some phase he should have grown out of by now. And I started to believe them. At first, I tried to softly suggest it to Fred, asking him if he ever thought about going back to school and how he could do so much more. I even suggested that he could run the restaurant, but hire someone else to do the cooking. I tried to frame it as support, like I was just trying to help him see his potential. But when he didn't budge, when he said he wasn't interested, that he didn't have the time, that he loved what he did, that's when things shifted for me. I started to push harder. I wasn't subtle anymore. I'd outright tell him he was wasting his talents. I even offered to help him manage the restaurant if it meant he'd pursue something else, but he refused, and kept insisting that he loved his job and that it was what he wanted to do with his life. That was when the resentment really took hold. I thought we were missing out. I felt like he was denying us some kind of great future, and that's when I started shit-talking his job to anyone who would listen. I would vent to my friends about it all the time, saying things I now realize were horrible. I'd complain about how stubborn he was, how he couldn't see that he was holding himself back. I'd go on about how being a chef, no matter how much he was making, was a dead-end job. I'd call it shitty outright. It wasn't just in private conversations with my friends either. I started making those comments when we were out in public, sometimes even when Fred was right there. I'd joke about how he spent more time perfecting a recipe than planning for our future. I convinced myself that it was just tough love, that maybe if I kept pointing it out, he'd eventually realize how ridiculous it was to put so much effort into just cooking. But of course he didn't. Fred didn't take the bait. He'd just smile politely or quietly brush it off, and that infuriated me. The more he refused to react, the worse I got. I started saying things directly to him when we were alone. I'd throw out little digs disguised as casual comments. Like when he'd come home late after a busy night at the restaurant, I'd say something like, "Must be nice to spend all your time obsessing over food instead of thinking about what really matters." Or if he was excited about a new dish he created, I'd roll my eyes and say, "I hope it's worth all the time you're wasting on this hobby of yours." The word hobby was intentional. I knew it would sting because to him, cooking wasn't just a job. It was his passion. But I wanted it to sting. I wanted him to feel as frustrated as I did. And yet, he didn't fight back. He'd just look at me with this quiet expression and go back to whatever he was doing. That only made me angrier. How could he not see it? How could he not realize I was trying to help him, trying to push him to be more? So I kept going. I didn't even care if we were with friends or family anymore. At dinner parties or gatherings, I'd bring up how much time Fred spent at the restaurant, framing it as a joke, but fully intending to embarrass him. Over time, Fred started to grow quieter around people, even though he was usually an extrovert. I used to think he was just being passive, but now I know it's my fault. The breaking point, though, came at one of my family gatherings. It was a baby shower for my cousin. After the main event wound down, a smaller group of us decided to stay behind, clean up a bit, and catch up over a few drinks. It was relaxed, easygoing, until the conversation drifted to work. And, as usual, I couldn't help myself. The drinks had loosened my tongue, and before I knew it, I was launching into another tirade about Fred's job. I complained about how much I hated that he was a chef, how it didn't matter how much money he made because, at the end of the day, he was still just a chef. It got a few murmurs from a few people, those awkward, uncomfortable responses people say when they're not sure how to respond, but I wasn't paying attention to anyone's reaction. I didn't even notice when Fred slipped out of the room. It wasn't until much later, after the group had broken up and people started heading home, that I realized Fred was gone. I went to look for him, expecting to find him quietly sulking in a corner or outside cooling off, but he wasn't anywhere to be found. When I checked my phone, I saw he'd left without a word. I ended up taking an Uber home, irritated and a little buzzed, but not overly concerned. When I walked through the door, Fred was already in bed, pretending to be asleep. I assumed he was just tired or a bit annoyed with me, but I thought we'd talk about it the next day, and everything would blow over like it always did. Of course, I was wrong. The next morning, Fred was up early, just like he always was. The usual warmth wasn't there. He didn't greet me with a smile or a kiss on the forehead like he always did. Instead, he was just cold, distant. I tried to brush it off, trying to lighten the mood with a joke about how he disappeared last night. But when I looked at him, the look he gave me wasn't one of amusement. He started talking. He said that he was disappointed, that he was at the end of his rope. He said that, honestly, he'd been thinking about how to bring it up, but last night was the final straw. He told me that my comments had hurt him deeply, more than I realized, and that he couldn't keep pretending it didn't bother him. He said he loved me, but that love wasn't enough anymore if I couldn't respect him for who he was, for what he did. He said he felt disrespected, belittled, and unappreciated as both a person and a partner. And then he said he couldn't do this anymore. I was completely stunned. I tried to explain, tried to tell him it wasn't what I meant, that I was just frustrated, but he wouldn't let me. He told me he had spent years trying to ignore the hurt, telling himself that I'd eventually come around, that I'd realize what I was doing, but he couldn't keep living in that kind of emotional limbo. He said he was done. He was leaving. I wasn't prepared for this. I thought we could talk it out, that we could fix it, but he didn't even give me that chance. It was like once he said those words, a huge weight had lifted from his shoulders. The Fred I knew was gone, replaced by someone who had made up his mind. He moved out within 3 days. Those 3 days were the hardest. He was polite, even courteous, but there was no softening his decision. No amount of pleading, begging, or promising to change made any difference. I suggested therapy. I promised I would work on myself, but nothing mattered. He was done. Now he's insisting on a divorce, and I'm stuck. I don't know what to do. This man has always been my biggest supporter. He's been there for me through thick and thin, emotionally, financially, and mentally. He's always been the one who had my back. He loves me wholeheartedly, and I love him too. But I ruined it. On top of that, I can't even afford the apartment on my own. He earns way more than I do, probably 3 or 4 times what I make. I'm barely scraping by with my job, and now I'm facing the possibility of losing everything. I don't want to lose him, but I don't know how to make it right. I'm hurt, I'm confused, and I have no idea how to fix this. I don't want to lose my husband. What do I do? Update. Well, hello, Reddit. I hope this update comes across well enough. I've been trying to write this for a while now, but for some reason the post refused to send, so this took a little longer than I expected. I know I said I was prepared to face whatever criticism I got, but honestly, I wasn't ready for the amount of backlash I've received. A lot of you really called me out on my behavior, and honestly, you made me look at myself in ways I really wasn't prepared for. Reading through your comments, I started to realize just how stupid I was in mocking Fred for being a chef, especially when he makes way more than I do, and I can barely scrape by. I feel embarrassed admitting that I was so caught up in my own stupid feelings that I didn't even think about how hurtful I was being. He worked hard to get where he was, and instead of supporting him, I acted like I had any right to decide what he should do with his life. I realize now that my job, my role as his partner, didn't give me the right to belittle his choices, and it was incredibly selfish of me to think otherwise. I've spent the last few weeks reflecting on everything, and I can't believe how badly I messed up. I kept hoping I could fix it, but I now know that's just not possible. He gave me the divorce papers, and I guess that's it. I should have seen it coming, but part of me is still shocked. It's like I thought there was some magical way for things to go back to how they were, but he meant it when he said he was done. He's a man of his word, and once he's reached that point, there's no going back. I've cried, called him, begged him to reconsider, and even cursed at him. But even now, it feels like I haven't reacted enough, like I'm still not doing enough to fix this. But then there's this other part of me, a voice that's not so shocked by all of this. I know Fred. He's always been the type to tolerate a lot of things for a long time. But once he's had enough, that's it. And I guess I should have known that, but I didn't realize how much I was pushing him until it was too late. I also saw a lot of people criticizing me for focusing on the apartment situation. I get why you're upset with me for mentioning it, but the truth is, it's something I'm still really struggling with. I can't afford to stay in the apartment on my own. Fred was the one carrying the financial load, and now that he's gone, the whole lease situation is just one more thing that's weighing on me. The landlord has agreed to let me stay in the apartment, but I still have to cover the rent for next year. How the hell am I supposed to do that? I barely manage as it is, and now I'm looking at a mountain of debt and a future I have no idea how to handle. So, yeah, I know I shouldn't have brought it up the way I did in my last post, but it's something that's on my mind. I'm not just concerned about the apartment. I'm just overwhelmed and honestly don't know what I'm supposed to do. I'm in such a bad place right now, and I don't know where to turn or how to get myself out of this mess. I just feel completely lost. Update. Hello, Reddit. It's been a while since I posted. Honestly, I've been avoiding making this update because, well, I've been kind of ashamed of how everything turned out. After the responses to my last post, I felt like I didn't even deserve to share an update. It's been a lot of self-reflection, and I just couldn't bring myself to talk about it. But here I am, finally overcoming the shame. The divorce is final. I can't even believe it, honestly. It's still so surreal to me. I went from being happily married to now being divorced, and I still don't fully comprehend how it happened. Yes, I walked away with nothing, and I guess I should have expected that. Not that I was after anything material, but I really didn't expect it to end the way it did. No support, no anything. I can't say I was entitled to any of it, but it still stings a little. I'm still in the apartment. I'm barely making it work, but I had to get a roommate to even afford the rent. The roommate situation? Oh my God, it's honestly one of the worst decisions I've made in a long time. She's the most troublesome person I've ever encountered. She's messy, inconsiderate, and honestly, she's making my life even harder. I'm considering breaking the lease and just leaving, but there's this part of me that can't bring myself to do it. This apartment means so much to me, even if it's a bit of a mess with her. It feels like the last shred of connection I have with Fred. Like if I leave, then I've lost everything that ties me to him. I know it sounds weird, but that's where I'm at right now. I want to stay tied to something that reminds me of him, and as ridiculous as it is, this apartment feels like that. The whole situation with my roommate has made things worse. She never cleans up after herself, and every time I confront her about it, she just tells me that if it bothers me, I should clean it. The nerve. And don't even get me started on the pets. She has like a zoo in her room, and none of them are taken care of properly. I've even tried calling animal services, but they never come. I don't get it. Aren't they supposed to check in when there's a complaint? The whole house smells. It's filthy, and I can't escape it. And then there's the debt. God, the debt. I told myself this would happen, but it doesn't make it any easier to deal with. It's like a dark hole I dug myself into, and I'm doing my best to pay it off, but I don't know how I'm going to climb out of it. My job doesn't pay nearly enough to cover everything, and I've got this roommate situation making everything worse. I'm honestly thinking about going back to school for a PhD or something. Maybe that's a way out of this mess. Maybe if I get a higher degree, I can land a better job, something that pays well enough to actually support myself and get out of the cycle I'm stuck in. But here's the thing. I know it's not a guarantee. I could spend all that time, energy, and money and still be left with nothing but a piece of paper and even more debt on top of what I already owe. It's kind of crazy to think about diving back into that world when I'm already buried in so much debt. And the thought of adding more to it scares me. I'm barely scraping by as it is. I'm still wondering if it's the right move. It feels like everything just took a crazy U-turn. I thought I had life figured out. I distanced myself from my high school friends a while ago, and honestly, that should have happened way sooner. I think a part of me knew that deep down, but I didn't act on it. They were a bad influence, and maybe, just maybe, if I had cut them off earlier, things with Fred wouldn't have gotten so out of hand. Maybe I wouldn't have been so easily swayed or so judgmental of him. But who knows? I can't change the past, and I can't blame anyone but myself for where I'm at now. So here I am, kind of friendless. It's a weird feeling not having that group of people to rely on, but I guess that's my own fault. The people I trusted, the ones I thought would be there for me, aren't. I don't have much in the way of a social life. Sure, I have some coworkers I'm a little close with, but it's not the same. It's hard to build new connections when you've spent so long distancing yourself from people, but I guess it's better than having toxic relationships. I'm still trying to figure out who I am without the people who used to define me, without Fred, without the life I thought I'd have. Everything's just uncertain. I feel like I have so much baggage now, financial, emotional, mental, and I regret everything. I regret how I treated Fred, how I mocked his job. I had no right to say those things. I was an idiot, a complete fool, and I'm paying the price now. If I could go back in time, I would support him. I can't forgive myself for what I did. I ruined the best thing I ever had. I don't even know what to do anymore. I feel like I've lost everything and everyone, and I don't know how to fix this. I just keep messing things up. I hate myself. I don't know how else to say it. Every day, I wake up and feel like I'm carrying this heavy weight that I can't shake off. He used to take care of me, not just physically, but emotionally too. I feel so stupid for pushing him away. I took him for granted, and now he's gone, and it feels like a part of me has gone with him. So there's your update, Reddit. I'm sorry if it's not as dramatic as you all would like or expect, but I really don't know what else to call it. I guess that's just the reality of it all. I know some of you will think I'm pathetic or that I'm just looking for pity, but honestly, I'm not. I'm just trying to make sense of everything and figure out where I go from here. If anything, I deserve every ounce of criticism, and I'm willing to take it. It's just part of the mess I've created for myself. So, yeah, that's it. There's nothing more to say. I don't know if this update helps anyone, but I felt like it was something I needed to do. It's not going to fix everything, but maybe it's a start.